All right, welcome to our next session. This is Oversight Planning and Risk Assessment. I'll turn the time over to Scott Brooksby and Patrick Van Gelder.
Great, thank you. My name is Scott Brooksby, and as I said, I'm joined by Patrick Van Gelder. We are Senior Technical Advisors. I'm on CIP and Patrick's on O&P. So again, welcome everybody. Appreciate your time here. Hopefully we're going to have some good questions like we did in the last session, so get those ready. Let's just kind of jump in here, if you will. Go to the next slide. So here's what we'll be talking about over the next hour. Basically, we're going to go over the oversight process. Basically, how do we assess risk, or kind of what's the process here for the CIP process here, if you will. We're going to get into kind of this Sun Bear Solar, the Orco, Tale of Two Entities piece. We're going to get into maybe how would we look at performance considerations, how would we compare these two. We'll get into maybe what the monitoring will look like, and then oversight options. So next slide. All right, so you may, if you've attended these workshops over the last couple of years, we've used this graphic in the past, but for those who haven't seen it before, really kind of at the heart of this, if you look at the very center, we've got that idea of an entity profile. What you should think of that is that's what WEC knows about the entities within the Western Interconnection, right? It's all the data we've collected over time through whether it's registration surveys, whether it's annual surveys, whether it's the RSOD data audits, whether it's through other tools that WEC may have. It's kind of what we know about you, and it's how we form, if you will, our oversight. So kind of, if you see there, the compliance oversight plan, we talk about the compliance oversight plan a lot, like, you know, it's a Word document that many of you get, that's the noun. But really, I want you to think of it as more of the verb, right? We have to do oversight planning as an activity on an ongoing basis. And that document we give you is just a snapshot, if you will. But it's not the main meat of really what WEC is required to do from an oversight plan perspective. And all of the activities are on this wheel are ones that are critical to making sure, you know, we execute on that for all of the entities. But for today's purposes, we're going to focus on kind of this risk assessment. That's kind of the we are here part of it. So if you go to the next slide. So we're going to talk about kind of that idea of assessing risk, but we're going to talk about it in the terms of these two fictional entities. So we've got Orco and Sun Bear. They're basically, you know, two GOPs. They are medium-sized, if you will. So they're similar, if you will, from a inherent perspective. But we start to see some differences, right? So we've got this next session where we differentiate. One's cold climate, one's warm. Now, those are still both inherent aspects, but they're ones they can't change, right? It's not like, you know, Orco's in the north, if you will, and Sun Bear's in the south. They can't really change that. So that's part of their inherent profile, and it does affect who they are from a risk perspective. Now, kind of these next three are getting into the performance side of it. So Orco has a tendency to give WEC very detailed entity data. Again, back to that slide before, that entity profile that we know about Orco is more fulsome, right? They've been more forthcoming. They've given us more of their controls. We know more of their program through the engagements that we've had. Whereas Sun Bear, it's usually lighter on on what they've been giving us, or it's not as mature, or maybe it's weaker. We have audited both entities. Orco, in this fictional example, has basically not had any issues at their past audit, and has even maybe had positive observations, whereas Sun Bear, our audit team has continued to find issues at the similar past audits. Orco, again, from a performance perspective, they have PNCs. They're mostly self-reported. In other words, they have detected controls, where Sun Bear, somebody else has to find it for them. So again, that's just kind of setting up who these two fictional entities are in your mindset. So if we'll go to the next slide. So let's kind of talk from just a CIP perspective, and we'll turn it over to O&P here in a little bit. Let's just talk from a CIP perspective, what we might look at here for, say, somebody like an ORCO. And mind you, this is just a few words on a slide. We obviously are going to look at a lot of the detailed data that we've got, but for today's presentation, we kind of want to boil that up maybe into a few key performance considerations, key takeaways. So we kind of mentioned this, right? So ORCO, past audits, like we mentioned, right? So they're coming out clean, if you will. I want to use that. I don't know if that's the right term, but they're coming out with not a lot of findings, and even potentially some positive observations. In other words, when we come in and we audit ORCO, things are looking pretty good, right? As far as PNCs go, sure, they still have them. We're not expecting entities to not have PNCs, but if ORCO is the one catching it, their detective controls are good, and their corrective controls are working well, then great. We're going to give credit where credit's due. They haven't had any cybersecurity incidents. In other words, there's kind of no issues there. And based on the control maturity, we have some confidence that they're probably going to detect it when it happens. Internal controls, when we do some evaluation there, again, they're meeting some target maturities. That doesn't mean everything's optimized, but it is meeting kind of what we would consider a good target maturity. And culture of compliance, right? It appears that from tone at the top, they understand what the CIP standards are. They've enforced this across all the departments. Everything's kind of working, systematically throughout. So we've got kind of a high confidence level based on their entity profile that ORCO is, has a stronger performance. So next. So let's talk about kind of SunBear, kind of in contrast, if you will. Similar here. So, past audits, again, regular findings. In other words, if our audit team is finding it and SunBear is not finding it themselves, and that means they don't really detect where their issues are at. And so we're going to take that into consideration as we look at risk. PNCs, they've got a few of them. Maybe the mitigation or the future prevention isn't as strong as we'd like, but it's acceptable, but it's maybe not, an overinvestment, if you will. Again, maybe no cybersecurity incidents, same as ORCO, but our confidence level may not be the same because, again, we're looking at an entity that maybe they've got an incident, they just don't know it because the detective controls we have in question. But at least at this moment, we don't know that there's an issue. Internal controls, they're meeting target maturity in less than half. So it's kind of that idea that, they're still going to meet it in some cases, but it's not kind of like where we'd like to see across the whole program. Again, we don't, there's no entity out there that's just doing everything, weekly, right? Or, a week, we understand there's a mix, right, of stronger performance down to weaker, but we still want to look to see that things are stronger in the majority of those. Culture of compliance, right? If we see this and it's not consistent, right? You've got one department head that's doing a really good job and another department head is not their strength, right? It's not really consistent across, and that brings concern that maybe some things will fall down in other areas. And then we look at maybe inadequate funding from the IT department, right? Again, from a cyber perspective, if you've got aged infrastructure, if everything's kind of end of life, that kind of deal, or it's not resourced or whatever. Again, there's no CIP standard that requires it. But from a risk perspective, we're kind of looking at this and saying, it looks like, they're really not investing in the cyber asset program itself. So with SunBear, that's kind of the fictional case here. So click next and then next again. We're just going to move on to the next slide. So what would all of this analysis do? Roughly what it would do is we're still going to look at, well, what's our concern? Now with ORCO, even though ORCO has stronger performance, doesn't mean that they are without concern. So maybe there's a few blind spots that WEC has to ORCO. So just a couple of examples we've got here. So the first one, you can see here in the italicized language, failure to implement adequate security monitoring results in undetected cyber events. The inability to manage remote connections increase the likelihood of losing data, control, or critical systems. So to put that in kind of layman's terms, we're still concerned, since we've not looked at maybe ORCO's supply chain risk management program yet. We're a bit blind to that. And we're concerned that if they aren't monitoring those third-party assets, and especially from remote connectivity, that potentially there could be exposure there. Again, it's more of a WEC is blind to this data. So again, do we know if Orco is monitoring their vendor connections, right? The next one, somewhat similar basically, but from an incident perspective, if there's a failure in a third-party product, does Orco know? Have they got advanced warning, right? We use SolarWinds as an example, right? Not that that could have been avoided, but, you know, were they watching the landscape, right? So, you know, one of those things where we just have questions, if you will, that are leading to some concerns. So click next. Sun Bear, on the other hand, yes, we have concerns, but these are a little bit more on the weaker side. So this first one, failure to coordinate product or service vendor representative access results in high physical access to BCS. Again, what does that mean? This one, we actually know Sun Bear has failed in the past at controlling logical and physical access for both employees, vendors, contractors. So now we actually have some negative performance, if you will, that's leading to a stronger operational concern. It's not an unknown, this is a known now. So now our concern with Sun Bear is getting stronger. The next one down, similar, I'm not going to read that, but it's kind of the same thing. And like I mentioned before, we're concerned that maybe Sun Bear's investment in their systems is going to lead to vulnerabilities. Right, we know they're underinvesting. We know that they potentially their patch management or their malicious code prevention program probably can't stand up when they've got a lot of assets that are end of life. And again, these are facts we already know about Sun Bear. So these are leading to a stronger operational concern, right? So you can see we've started out with kind of these entities that are somewhat similar in inherent risk, but from performance perspective, really start to diverge from, you know, stronger controls versus weaker controls. And the concern with the stronger control programs are not as strong of a concern as they are with this weaker. So click next and then next again. We're going to move on to this. So what would this lead to, right? Kind of the so what here, you know, so with Orco, we're still going to monitor them. But based on those operational concerns, we're kind of, again, looking at maybe that third-party supplier piece. So, you know, we kind of got the subcomponents of CIP 5, the CIP 10 on there, CIP 13, right? And again, we're trying to kind of maybe shore up some blind spots. It's not that we know Orco is underperforming there, but that they are, but we still want to make sure that they have applied their past history of maybe good or strong practices to these particular standards. So click next. Now, Sun Bear, on the other hand, you'll see some overlap here with what Orco had, but for Sun Bear, for the example, now we've got a lot stronger of a monitoring stance, if you will, a scope. You know, we've got the access controls, right? Because again, we know they failed in the past, so we want to put those in play here, right? Their network with the CIP 5, because again, are they controlling remote access? Are they looking at from a vendor perspective, physical access with CIP 6, CIP 7, CIP 10, CIP 13? Again, all of these really go to those stronger operational concerns. So we've got a more of a fulsome monitoring scope. Click next, if you will. And then when you kind of put the two side by side, you can still see there is some similarities. So from our perspective, although these entities could maybe compare notes and say, well, I've got CIP 5, and another one's going, well, I got CIP 5 too. Well, yes, you both have it in scope, but the concern driving that reason is different, right? It's stronger in one case than the other, and usually you can start to see where some of these are coming through. And for those who've kind of been through some of these recent recent audits lately, you know, through maybe your internal controls data collection template, where WEC has shared those operational concerns, you can kind of start to see where some of this is boiling up. So again, they're different, even though there might be some similarities. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Patrick, who's going to take us through a similar example, but on the O&P side, and then we'll kind of wrap it up and be open for questions. So go ahead, Patrick.
Thank you, Scott. So let's take a look at some of these performance considerations we will review to perform the operations and planning portion of the risk assessment. Like Scott said, we're going to be looking at more data than just these few items. It's kind of a small snapshot of what we're looking at. So we'll start with Orco. So they have no potential non-compliances at the last audit. This indicates that WEC had reasonable assurance that Orco was maintaining their compliance within the scope of the audit. No findings can also suggest that other related requirements are okay. For example, it's not possible to audit FAC 8 requirement 6 for having facility ratings consistent with the associated facility ratings methodology or documentation for determining facility ratings without looking at that facility ratings methodology or the documentation. And we know that if an audit team suspected an issue with the facility ratings methodology or the documentation, they would expand scope or make a note of that in the RSAW, an area of concern recommendation or something associated with it. Still may not be a potential non-compliance for requirements 1, 2, or 3, but there would be a note made. But if there was no findings, no recommendations or area concerns associated with that, we can glean a little bit of information that the facility ratings methodology or the documentation was reasonable. In this instance, Orco has a relatively low number of PNCs, which were all self-reports. These self-reports appear to have been submitted within a reasonable time of discovering the issue, and they included remediation steps to return to compliance, and also included effective mitigation for preventing a repeat instance of the non-compliance. And based on their most recent entity data questionnaire, Orco has recently added a second site, combustion turbine site, to their generation portfolio. At this point, the risk engineer may not have concerns with the established processes with the original footprint and may focus just on those BES changes. So the risk engineers will review the RSAWs and responses to data requests to gain a full understanding of the engagements. Additionally, the risk engineers will review recommendations, area of concerns, and positive observations. And at the last audit, the risk engineers conducted an after monitoring assessment with the audit team to gain an understanding of the findings and the culture of compliance for Orco. So for Orco, the audit team indicated that the RSAW's responses to the data request were complete and submitted promptly. And they indicated that Orco was open and transparent during the interviews conducted. This leads a lot for us understanding Orco's culture of compliance and their dedication to the reliability of the bulky electric system. So next, take a look at Sunbear. So the audit team identified multiple potential non-compliances at the last audit, indicating that Sunbear was not able to demonstrate reasonable assurance of compliance with the requirements in the scope of the audit. This also suggests that Sunbear does not have sufficient controls in place to maintain compliance and reliability. Sunbear has had numerous potential non-compliances since it was registered, and most of these were submitted after the audit notice letter was sent. For its potential non-compliances, Sunbear rarely would include steps taken to return compliance and the steps for preventing reoccurrence of the non-compliance. Typically, mitigating activities had to be requested by WEC. Based on its most recent entity data questionnaire, Sunbear has not made any recent changes to its BES equipment and has no plans to make any changes. The previous after monitoring assessment with the audit team indicated that the RSAWs did not contain a valuable narrative from Sunbear. So if we don't get good information from an entity, it requires additional data requests. Sometimes data requests are inevitable, but the more valuable the narratives are and the more valuable the information, more complete the information is in a data request, the fewer there will be. And also Sunbear submitted data requests late. Based on the interaction with Sunbear from the previous audit call through the opening presentation, interviews, data requests, daily debriefs, and the closing presentation, the audit team felt that Sunbear did not demonstrate a strong culture of compliance. So from this, we see numerous concerns with both entities. One entity seems to have more of a mature compliance program, and one entity seems to have not so mature of a compliance program, less mature controls. And we use that inherent risk assessment to go into our performance considerations. And when we look at the performance considerations, we determine what operational concerns we may have with this entity. So next and next. So some of these operational concerns we'll look at. For Orco, we had one that said failure to maintain an updated cold weather preparedness plan could result in the omission of new equipment from the plan. So this is relating to the new EOP 11 requirements 7 and 8. And part of our concern here is we want to understand what process Orco has developed to ensure its cold weather preparedness plan is periodically reviewed and updated to make sure it's complete. So we know they're in a cold weather climate. That's a concern. That's an inherent risk that they're dealt with. It's a new expectation for the entity. So it's something that we haven't observed yet. So we don't know what their status is on how they've developed that plan and what controls they have around it. So it's just a concern we have about that specifically. It's not that they're doing anything wrong or we expect them to fail at this. We just haven't observed it, and we want to make sure that we understand what they're doing. So another concern we had was failure to identify all applicable personnel that need training on cold weather preparedness could result in untrained personnel and increase the likelihood of failing to implement necessary measures. So once again, this is new, and we just want to know if Orco has identified the appropriate personnel at its new generating station. So when reviewing these concerns, we're going to learn a lot more about what controls Orco has developed and implemented to ensure its compliance with the standard. But ultimately, we want to understand how they ensure reliability of their operations of the BES equipment. So Orco's participation in transparency and controls reviews and interviews is a good indicator of its culture of compliance. For Sunbear, we came up with the operational concern of failure to develop an adequate cold weather preparedness plan could result in equipment not being maintained as needed. So since Sunbear has had asset identification failures in the past and has not demonstrated positive performance when implementing those new requirements, even though they're in a warm weather environment, warm weather environments still see occasional cold weather, and that's when it would be more important for those warm weather entities to implement their cold weather procedures. Those that are always in cold weather, they may have a better chance of understanding how it is to operate in cold weather all the time. So failure to train personnel on the implementation of cold weather preparedness could result in equipment not operating as expected and increase the likelihood of impacting the output of the generating station. So Sunbear has had some issues in the past providing adequate training to its personnel. So maybe we have seen COM2 training that was inadequate, or PER 6 training that was inadequate or insufficient, or indicated there was a training concern there. So we want to look at Sunbear just in case there's a cold weather event and their entity, their output is needed to help provide BES reliability. So let's look at some of the monitoring. So next and next. So for Orco, they have reasonably good performance. And some of the things we might want to look at, since they're an operating entity, medium-sized, we want to make sure that their communications are still good. Their three-part communication, their entities are trained, their operators are trained to respond to operating instructions from their BAs, TOPs, and RCs. And we want to make sure that maybe their facilities are up to date. So these first two could be focused just on their changes to the BES. This could be a way to focus how we monitor them. It could just be a self-certification. It doesn't necessarily mean that these are all going to be an audit scope. We had the cold weather concerns, and then we're looking at the output of the generator, their capability for Mod 25, and then for PRC 24, we want to make sure that their protection systems are coordinated with their generators. So next, we can see Sun Bear has very similar requirements associated with it, not just the communications or the facility ratings, but we've also had concerns about maybe their vegetation management, a couple more of their protection system maintenance items, and some voltage control. But they do, if they compare notes between the two of them, they do have some similarities for similar reasons. Our monitoring methods may be different for these two entities, and our intervals between monitoring may be different between these two entities based on all of the considerations we look at. So there are some similarities, but there are some differences in how we're going to provide oversight on those areas. So if we can go next and next again. So we've seen this in the past. And what this is doing is it's categorizing the entities 1 and 2 for higher inherent risk, in categories 3 and 4 for moderate inherent risk, and for 5 and 6 for lower inherent risk. And then each one of those, we will look at whether or not they've had demonstrated positive performance. And then it gives us a range for monitoring intervals. So let's see how Orco and Sun Bear were assessed and how we're developing their oversight plans. As we discussed in the 2022 fall RNS workshop, with demonstrated positive performance is expected to be a high bar to meet. And WEC would have to observe strong performance for the vast majority of performance considerations. Without demonstrated positive performance may mean that an entity has demonstrated poor performance. It could also mean that an entity has a mix of strong, average, or weak performance amongst the performance considerations, just not strong for a vast majority. Or, without demonstrated positive performance, could simply mean that WEC has not had the opportunity to observe enough controls to reasonably assess the performance of the entity. Demonstrated positive performance is used when developing an entity-specific oversight strategy. The strategy will include the proposed monitoring interval and monitoring methods. Such monitoring methods could include self-certification, spot check, investigation, or audit. So since our two fictitious companies are registered the same and are of comparable size, and based on our compliance oversight planning process, both entities were medium impact So WEC has determined that the inherent risk posed to the BES for Orco and Sunbear is similar, and that's going to be the moderate inherent risk. So they're going to start both with category 3 and a proposed 3 to 5 year monitoring interval. However, WEC has observed strong performance by Orco in a vast majority of performance considerations, suggesting that it has sufficient controls in place to reasonably ensure that it's part of the reliability of the BES. Therefore, they have been determined to be with demonstrated positive performance and will be placed in category 4 with a proposed 4 to 6 year monitoring interval. For Sunbear, WEC has observed strong performance in only a few performance considerations. This suggests Sunbear has some work to do to demonstrate to WEC that it has sufficient controls in place to reasonably ensure its part of the reliability of the bulky electric system. Therefore, they have been determined to be without demonstrated positive performance and will remain in category 3 and a proposed 3 to 5 year monitoring interval. When the risk engineers develop the monitoring plan, demonstrated positive performance will influence the monitoring methods proposed. A requirement could be proposed for Sunbear's next audit, and the same requirement could be a self-certification for Orco. Additionally, the two companies' operational concerns for the same requirement could suggest different focuses at audit. For example, at Orco, we could be looking just at the changes that occurred, where Sunbear, we might want to look at their whole program again, because we really have a lot of additional questions about controls around that process. Additionally, the categories will help WEC develop an overall monitoring plan and will influence the scheduling of audits. So we use this categorization to determine who we're going to audit next and how we're going to schedule these audits or spot checks and self-certifications. Our goal is to continually improve the consistency of the compliance oversight plan process. This also means that most compliance oversight plans should be different because of different inherent risks and different performance of the entities. Smaller entities that are newly registered and have not had an opportunity to demonstrate positive performance may have very similar compliance oversight plans to start with. But as we learn more about the entity's performance, the plans will evolve. So our process should be consistent and the compliance oversight plans should be unique. Next. So Scott and I would like to thank everyone for participating, and we're free to answer questions. Scott, do you have any other words of wisdom for us?
Nope, I'm excited about the questions.
We have a few for you. This one got the most votes, so we'll start with it. It says, could you give us an idea of what meets target maturity might entail? Where are WEC's expectations for risk and controls program maturity? Okay.
That is really a good question. I'm glad that one got a lot of votes. You're going to hate the answer because it's that it depends answer. So target maturity is something that basically is a moving target for each entity and for maybe even each requirement. So we don't certainly have a blanket statement that says all entities must meet optimized across all or the majority of controls. No, not at all. It'll be basically kind of like I say, per entity, per requirement basis. Now, with that said, I mean, if you're a small entity, we're not expecting a huge investment. And since I'm on the cyber side, from your CIP program, so we may see that several of your controls really have to be just managed, right? They are ones that maybe they have a lot of manual processes around them, and we would set that and work with you. That's your target maturity for your program. And of course, if you're small, it's maybe CIP 2, CIP 3. and there's not a lot to it as far as optimizing. But if you're a large entity with a large IT infrastructure, we're going to look for more of those optimized, right? Certainly there's something like antivirus. We expect you to have, an industry standard antivirus that auto updates the signatures, auto deploys, that kind of thing, that you're monitoring that, and it doesn't have a lot of manual backend. But we understand like things like access revocation. You can't automate that because you don't always know when people are leaving, right? So that's going to probably be a managed requirement because that's always going to have a manual side to it. And we just know that's going to be the target. So really, it is going to be one of those things that we're going to work to negotiate on. But I think you can do a lot of work by actually just looking at these controls yourself and figuring, would this meet what should be set as a target maturity? And could I defend this with WEC and say, look, this is right where we need to be, right? It has the right amount of people, process, and technology behind it. And here's the processes that are ad hoc. Here's the processes that are managed. Here's the parts that are optimized, all where they should be, right? And if that's the case, and you can defend it, we're likely going to agree with you.
Thank you. Our next question is, how are you assessing the compliance program and how are you gathering data to do that evaluation?
Oh, great. Another good question. Keep them coming. So this is one that actually has been debated across the ERO and probably will continue to be debated for years to come. So culture of compliance is a performance consideration, and it is one that we are always kind of working on, because this is probably a softer side, right? You can't just take data on an Excel spreadsheet and say good culture of compliance, right? So we are kind of looking at things like how quickly do you identify a PNC, right? How quickly do you detect it? How quickly do you remediate it, right? Because that tells us you've got more maturity. When we look at your internal compliance program documentation, how well is it done? And then can we see the effects of that within the program? If you said one thing in your internal compliance program documentation, but it's not making its way through to the end team, if maybe our audit team interviews a manager and he's like, what internal compliance program document? That doesn't bode well, right? And yes, that's a softer skill. That is, one of those things that we look at, do people know what the compliance requirements are? Is it department by department, right? We've got into entities where, boy, one department head, knows everything. And the other one is like, what, So those are softer skills that are assessed, but that is kind of part of the art that we have to look at here and kind of figure that out. So good question. Always one that's kind of open for that art form.
Thank you. We have a question that says, I heard the proposal to change the audit interval from 3 years to the scale you shared was rejected. Can you shed any light on that, please?
Yes. So, what that basically means is, so if you're a BA, TOP, RC, you're still required by NERC rules of procedure to be audited no less than every 3 years. So yes, that was rejected. I don't know if that's the right word, but basically that it's still the case that we have to do that every 3 years. So actually, if you'll go back a slide, maybe, yeah. So we will, if let's say you're a medium impact TOP and we give you that, 4 to 6 years, we can put that in your COP and we can kind of put that in our planning, if you will. But yes, we are still technically going to have to see you every 3 years and do an audit. So it's kind of going to come with an asterisk, if you will. We're looking at ways to kind of work with that. Maybe we can alternate CIP and O&P audits, or, maybe it's, since the performance is good and strong, it's going to be a lighter scope. But, the reality is we still do need to work within that 3-year rule.
Great. We did get a question about this slide specifically. It says, how does WEC notify an entity what category they fall into? For example, will an entity know whether they're moderate, high risk, or have positive performance?
Yes, and so this is in the COP template. This is section 3.0. has this table in there. So if you've gotten a COPS compliance oversight plan, sorry, I hate to use that term, CO COP, it has negative connotations. So if you've gotten a compliance oversight plan since 2019, section 3 will have this table in there, and there will be a summary of what's in there. The Align tool, which we're also moving to this year, same thing, is going to have that same section. It will inform that there. If you're on the older, unfortunately, you've not kind of been updated into this new structure yet, but your next compliance oversight plan will have this, and it will tell you where you fall.
Thank you. Going back to the questions around that cycle, will you do half the scope 1 3-year cycle and the other half the next cycle?
Well, it's the answer everybody hates. It depends, right? We're going to try to work that so that whether we alternate CIP and O&P or do half or not, that's kind of open, if you will. But for those entities that are on the 3-year and have demonstrated positive performance, we are trying to make sure we reflect that we're giving credit where credit's due, but still working within the rules that we are handed. Again, another art form.
Great. How does the WEC and NERC CMEP IP influence an entity's audit scope? For example, should all entities expect to be audited for the EOP 11 cold weather requirements?
I'm going to let Patrick handle this one.
I would say no. They should not expect that. They should expect that we consider the risks identified in the CMEP IP as part of our assessment. And if an entity is demonstrates performance one way or the other, we may include or exclude those requirements from scope, depending on numerous performance considerations and risk factors. So unfortunately, like Scott says, it really depends, but we always use the CMEP IP as a guide because it does identify a lot of risks that should be ERO wide and indicates why they're on that in that document to begin with. So they are important to us, and we do give them probably more consideration than requirements that aren't listed on there. But it doesn't mean it's an automatic audit or even automatic monitoring.
Thank you. So the next question is, my entity's size and infrastructure limits me from ever scoring above a 4. Do I have any incentive other than potential scope reduction, perhaps interval reductions?
Yeah, and that's really a good question. Yeah, so if you kind of look at these 3 different buckets, if you will, that red, green, and blue that are on here, you're right. Once you're kind of in a 1 to 2, you're in 1 to 2, 3 to 4. You can't move from 1 to 6, period, right? If you're a high packed entity, if you're a big, if you're a big guy, the best you can get is 2, right? Because you are higher inherent risk. So in this question, right, this is an entity that's obviously in that moderate 3 to 4. So yes, what we're kind of in the past, we've used the stick of monitoring, right? The idea that, you can be audited, we can do these things. What this is trying to introduce is that carrot. And what you alluded to in your question is, okay, if you are in that 3 to 4 and you get a 4 of inherent risk with demonstrated positive performance, kind of what's the gain? Right. So that's the carrot we are trying to do. And I think you alluded to like reduced interval or something like that. Yes, that's exactly what we're trying to do. It also may be the heavy lift of this is, maybe you're not going to find yourself on the audit schedule again, unless you're, RC, BA, TOP, and we're required to do it. But if you are in that 4 to 6 years, maybe we'll just use more self-certification as our monitoring tool, right? Or maybe we'll rely on a spot check only as needed should a risk come forward. So it's kind of those things where we are trying to make sure you get the carrot, if you will, of good positive performance, and that you can see that. But so when we call it incentive, it's something that we're kind of working on with you on what does that look like for you.
Thank you. Are audit areas of concern and recommendations still being included in compliance oversight plans as risk considerations? If yes, how does WEC stay informed of the entity's efforts to address those areas of concern or recommendation?
No, it's again another good question, right? Areas of concerns, yes, that's something that we look at, right? Because if there was something that was out there, we want to see that it was addressed. Recommendations, again, maybe not so. A lot of times it's recommendations for documentation update. Again, it might have a minor impact on your compliance oversight plan assessment. Now, as far as staying informed, we've now got this process where 90 days post audit, we can meet with an entity and kind of figure out what their track record is. But we don't necessarily have a hard follow-up because, again, it is a factor in your oversight plan, but it's never one that is, shall we say, like, hugely onerous, or it shouldn't be, right? That, along with a lot of the other data that we have about your performance, helps inform it. Whether you're on track to do the AOC or recommendation is something we'll probably flag so that maybe next time we come in at audit 3 or more years from now, we'll want to follow up and see, did that AOC get addressed? What did they do with the recommendations? That kind of thing. So from an oversight perspective, we'll look at it again, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be some heavy hand from an audit perspective.
Okay, next question. Is there any plan to merge all regions into a common IRA, so inherent risk assessment?
So I think I know where you're going with the question, right? Because it basically is this. So the answer is yes. All the regions have gotten together and recognized we're all asking same or similar questions, right? Somebody asks it in MBA, the other asks it in megawatts, right? I ask how many cyber systems you have, somebody else asks cyber assets, right? So we've gone through and normalized all of those questions and we've loaded them into a line. Now we are still working on the deployment of those because not all regions want to ask the same questions, but when you get a question from WEC and from RF and whatever, it should be the exact same question and you'll be filling those out in a line. So the answer kind of is yes there. More to come on that, how that's going to look, how we're going to deploy it, still stuff we're working out. But we recognized the problem statement a couple of years ago and we've been working on that.
Great, you did touch on that question part, so thank you. Are internal controls for cold weather likely to evolve into an expectation for O&P internal controls for other forms of extreme weather, such as heat or flooding?
Patrick.
I don't know how to answer that. I wouldn't think so. I think what we want to know is that an entity is remaining reliable, operating, maintaining their systems in a reliable fashion. And with the new cold weather requirements, that gives us an opportunity to explore those controls. If we see a risk in the Western interconnection for those concerns, we could make recommendations or suggestions or any other method we could have an outreach, an RNS workshop discussion about it. It doesn't necessarily have to be compliance related to be a risk or a concern to the bulk electric system. But I don't think we would be reviewing controls related to that unless it was associated with a standard. I mean, extreme weather would be loosely related, I think. But if we did see a risk and there was a concern, we have other avenues to provide outreach for that with other groups at WEC.
Thank you. Is an effort underway to update the NERC rules of procedure to allow the effort WEC has put into providing the benefits of demonstrated positive performance such as longer audit cycles.
This kind of goes back to what we're given by FERC. So I will say, I don't think that we're done asking FERC to change the rules of procedure. I suspect we're going to have to take more time to show how the risk-based approach is working and give them the confidence level that we are still, if you will, keeping our foot on the gas pedal. So that's going to take some time before that. I think that happens, and then of course NERC rules of procedure will change along with it. I again suspect.
Thank you. How does WEC look at inherent risk versus residual risk based on the entity's internal controls to inform compliance monitoring and audit scopes?
Oh, that's another good question, right? So when it comes right down to it, your residual risk, well, it really is the key to your oversight planning, right? We start with inherent risk just because we need to kind of know how big you are and kind of what your potential impact to the bulk power system could be. But really what we care about is how are you performing? So if you have good internal controls, that says it all. Now, mind you, we're never going to look at your whole program. We just can't. We have to scratch the surface. For anybody who has been through an ICDCT, which is an internal controls data collection template, understands we're usually going to ask for 5, maybe 6 of your control sets. Now that could be dozens and dozens of controls, but as far as the objectives, it's only going to be a few, which could be, for your large company, could be hundreds of controls. But we're going to take some inference that if you have a good controls program and we picked these 5 or 6 objectives and the controls you gave us all were meeting a good maturity level or target maturity level, then we're going to infer that the rest of your program is hopefully meeting that and give you the benefit of the doubt, and then reflect that within your next monitoring schedule, whether that's reduced interval if we can, whether that's less at next audit, whether that's the tool we choose or whatever. But I don't want anybody to feel like, oh, hey, this is all about just getting WEC off your back. We're doing this because we feel you've got it, right? But we still have a requirement for the reliability and security of the bulk power system. So yes, we're going to still monitor you. Don't ever think that we're going to be out of the monitoring world. It's our job to make sure that you keep your foot on the gas pedal and you're doing this. We just know that if you've got it, if it's meeting control, maturity, we can go focus elsewhere for a season before we come back to you and understand you still got it, right?
Thank you. Are there any lessons learned or other published materials of how organizations have improved from, say, a 1 to a 6?
Oh, good question. And the answer to that at this moment is no. Again, nobody can go from a 1 to a 6, but we have actually had a couple of our entities join some of these monthly, what we used to call the open webinar. Forgot what we call them now. Sorry. But we've had them come and bring their controls to us and address these, right? We've done some access control ones. I forgot we could maybe done a vegetation management one. So we've kind of had them come forward and present what are some of their best practices in that case, but we've not created a white paper or anything like that. But we would love it if honestly folks out there who are in that world would love to come and present at open webinars or other fashion. Please share your best practices with each other and maybe other forums outside of what WEC provides.
Awesome. I think this is related to the first part of, or a part of that question is, can a high inherent risk entity with demonstrated positive performance and strong system of controls in place be moved from a 2 to 4 year audit cycle to a 5 to 7 year audit cycle?
And there is potential. So this diagram doesn't show it, but if you look at your compliance oversight plan and it says section 3.0, the heading over that 1 to 3 years or 6+ years says target monitoring interval. So if you're a high inherent risk entity and you're a category 2, your target is 2 to 4. So we'll shoot for that. Now, I haven't seen it happen, but let's just say you are optimized. You're just doing a great job. we could, in theory, go beyond that. We could justify going to a 5-year audit schedule if that was the case, because, you know, again, that's a target interval. But if your performance is such, you know, we work here in our oversight planning department to determine that you could go beyond that, then yeah, that's a possibility.
Thank you. Does WEC share the oversight categories with entities?
Okay, and that was, we answered that earlier. That was so if you have a COP since 2019, it'll be in section 3.0 of your COP. If you don't, if you've got an older one, apologies, you won't see it specific to your entity until you get a new update, either through the documents or probably a line coming later this year.
Okay. I have another question. Could you explain in more detail the role self-logging plays in determining an entity's risk? Does a self-logging entity see benefits of reduced audit scope or positive performance classification?
Good question. And the answer is, at this moment, it doesn't, but that is being discussed. So your timing is good timing, but it is more to come on that, because yes, that question has been brought up. Should demonstrate positive performance and self-logging, you know, should one inform the other, you know, back and forth. And so that is on the table right now and being looked at. So I appreciate your question, but, you know, I'll just say, please stand by.
All right, that was our final question for today. Thank you so much, Scott and Patrick. We will now have an hour break. We will come back at 1 p.m. Mountain for risk impact and cold weather. So we'll see you then.